Alright, that's quite good. You can see discoloration on that shoe. That's very obvious corrosion there, much more so than on the top cover. Why that should be particularly, I don't know. They're two mating metal surfaces with nominally the same characteristics because they'll both be brass with chrome plating on them, but for whatever reason the shoe is corroded more than the top cover did. The filament frame counter here is quite dirty. That would be all dirt that had come in through the top here, through the hole where you view your numbers, and then run round the inside underneath. Bit of corrosion there on that spring, that's not at all unusual. A little bit on that spring too. I'll clean that frame. Just so nothing greasy's going back against the glass when I screw it back together. Okay, let's put the shoe on first. And all I'm doing is basically putting all these pieces back in and pretty much the reverse of taking them apart. I'll put the glass in last. This piece, when you put this back on the camera, make sure you have that window at the front, towards the front of the top cover. It'll still work the other way around, but it won't be quite right. I'll just put a wipe of synthetic grease through there. A wipe on the spring, the wavy washer. Seat that in place, put the top cover on, I'll put a wipe on this spring, the frame counter spring. Get this centered up on that spring okay. That looks pretty good. Hold that and check that this turns easily. It does. Alright, so the viewfinder eyepiece lens there, I'll clean that with some glass cleaner. I'll just put a tiny drop on a cotton bud, a Q-tip. I'll do the outside surface first because that's typically the dirtiest, and by getting that clean it helps you judge how well you're doing with the inside surface. And the inside surface you can only get to a little amount of it. If you swing your cotton bud around, you'll be able to swirl it around in there to some extent and at least cover the opening that you can see. And I'll just blow that out, make sure I get everything off there. That's not bad. I think I'll do that again just for good measure. The problem is if it's at all greasy in there, if there's any oils have deposited themselves on that glass surface, it's very difficult to get it clean. It's the inside edge face that you should be most concerned about, because that's the hardest to get to. You can clean the outside surface later to your heart's content. Okay, so this glass at the front, now I usually clean these the same way all the time. I use a cotton handkerchief, or if you had a microfiber cloth, of course, that would do the job quite nicely. If you want to get all of that filth off that glass, there'll be all sorts of... If you just left this on the top cover and cleaned from the outside, inevitably you'd be left with any greasy rubbish still entrapped and around the edges, and inevitably that would seep back out onto the glass and make it look ugly again as soon as your back's turned. So it's worth taking the glass out and cleaning it. Okay, I've got that nice and clean. Make a point of cleaning inside your top cover too, because if you don't, you'll have left grease and rubbish around in there which will transfer to the glass. Okay, so all we need to do is get this in place, and I'll put that on there back to front. Alright, I've got that positioned. Get its two screws in place. These frames are a bit useless because of the offset. Because your fixing points are over here, but your lens is over here. It means that if you apply a little bit of pressure on that glass when you're cleaning it, or if you just grab the camera and your finger inadvertently presses against that glass lens, it means it's likely to shift. It's not very well supported. If they'd done a proper job of design, the bracket would have been supported on both sides here, and that problem would never have arisen. Okay. Well, that looks pretty good. I can see a mark on the glass there. What's that? No, it's gone now. Okay. So there's our top cover, all clean, ready to go. So, there's not much more involved in this. I'll just gather the pieces together. Okay. Well, the shutter release button can go on the top of the shutter release. Make sure you have this shutter release round this way. This little notch or cutout sits above that screw. It's quite important. I'll just turn this around so I can get to it easily. Here is the film release button, which sits in that position. In this case, this camera had a little brass standoff on that shaft. I don't know why. Then it had a spring, and that brass standoff is strange. The spring doesn't sit around the brass standoff, it sits on the brass standoff. So if the brass standoff's job is to limit the travel of this thing, well, inevitably it means that the spring would be coil bound. And if that's the case, it would do the same job all by itself. See if I can get this thing seated. This is always awkward getting this in position. Because it's not stable, it wants to fall over. So I'm holding that in place with tweezers from behind. I'm checking that the shutter release button and the film release button both work. I can put the screws in the top cover. Yeah, that brass standoff in there, that brass spacer, that really is an odd thing. It doesn't really make sense. Of course, I have one other Retinette F, which I'll look in the top of that and see if that has that component or not. That's all working nicely, so I just need to do the tidying up now, I suppose. We've got the leatherette on the base? No, not yet. So the leatherette on the base, rewind knob on the top of the camera, and just the stuff on here and we're done. I'll just clean this up. Now it looked like there was rust in there, but I suspect that that was not rust. That red dusty looking stuff is very probably the remains of the camera case. You know that they're lined with a red velvet felty sort of material. Well, that often gives up over time and starts coming to bits, and it'll leave reddy brown powdery residue about, and I think that's what that is. Okay, where's the screwdriver to put this thing together? I can see one. This will do nicely. Put a wipe of synthetic grease on that spring. Pop the rewind over it. Take the screw, run that in, tighten it, check that that does turn, open the back of the camera, my tweezers through the fork on the rewind shaft there. And the video camera's not going to focus, that would be too easy. Here we go. Spin that on, tighten it up. We're done at the top of the camera. The bottom of the camera can be dealt with now. Okay, let's carry on with this. I need to remove the advance lever. Now don't want to bump this because I don't want that unwinding and then having to try and get that lined up again. Get you back in picture slightly, that's better. Right, here's our leatherette, it's all cleaned, it's all ready to go. Just check that I've got all my screws in position on the top there, that all looks good. Find a toothpick. One of the things about working on cameras, cleaning them, servicing them, etc., is you go through a lot of consumables. Paper towels, toothpicks, cotton buds, and adhesive, of course, lubricants, glass cleaner, here I'm just trying to get an even covering of adhesive right to the edges. It's important to make sure that the adhesive runs right to the edges of your leatherette. If leatherettes are going to come loose, they're going to come loose from the edges. Stuff doesn't peel up from the middle. Get that out of the way. Fit this to the camera body. Now the leatherettes are almost always somewhat shrunken, so they don't want to fit down neatly round raised bosses like around the rewind button or around the centre here. And it's worth watching the release button for the camera back, because that can stick to the leatherette. So I'm just going to put a wipe of synthetic grease around that and just work it once or twice, and that will stop it from sticking to any of that adhesive. Oops, let's get that seated again. That's fine. Get my film advance lever back in place. And get the leatherette patch on that. It doesn't look particularly sparkly. Here I'm just scraping any old adhesive off the back of that might be there, any loose stuff. And I'm giving it a wipe with Naphtha to remove any grease or oil that might be present, to give the adhesive a fighting chance of sticking. Put a little blob on there. Now this is probably not best practice, putting blobs on direct from the glue tube like that. That's just laziness, and comes from the familiarity of doing this for a long time. Best practice is to squeeze your adhesive out onto another piece of paper and transfer it on the end of a toothpick to the leatherette. I'll get that seated in place, make sure it's stuck down well. The back catch cover, back catch release cover is here. I'll just give those parts a quick wipe. They don't need any lubricant, they just need to be clean. They're already quite clean. Perhaps I've been over them once before. Okay, so these parts. Usually take one screw, put it up through the cover, the tripod surround, put this piece on, the screw running through the long slot, fit its return spring in place. That's all just seated there, it's just sitting there. It's waiting to fly to pieces. Then just fit this onto the camera. If you have any reason to suspect that that spring popped out of position, take it off and have another go. You don't want the spring getting trapped between the screw and the camera base or any other unfortunate arrangement. It needs to be positioned exactly where it should be. Otherwise you'll end up with a mutilated spring, which will then never work. Okay, so looking at that, just getting rid of that stray bit of adhesive there. That is our Kodak Retinette type 022/7, the Retinette F. This is one of the later examples with a chrome body trim, and that's all ready to go. It's fully assembled. This is the earlier example of the Retinette F, black body edges. I'm just going to take the top off. I'm going to service this one too, but I probably won't record any of that. This one's quite dirty and sandy, I can see. And unless I see something different in here, something I haven't shown you before, you won't see much more of this model. The screws here on the top cover are a little bit dirty looking. Certainly someone's been at that, that's a bit rough. Let's lift the top cover off. What am I interested in here? Well, first off, this is round the wrong way. That should have been round that way. That's possibly been not working smoothly. This is full of sand here, so it certainly needs to be serviced. And our film release button here does not have that spacer. So quite possibly that spacer was just a rogue component on that other camera. There's no, it was unexpected, it wasn't correct, and it doesn't look like it's quite right. Now, here we have the two-piece arm here, but in this case we have this screw running down the top there. It doesn't hook directly into the cocking rack below, so there's certainly a difference there. I'll bring you back once I've got all the pieces out and point out any differences. I've taken the 4 screws out that hold this central block in place. Now to get this out, let's just get rid of that for a start. That's just a cocking. This thing here, you need to slide that all the way down that ramp so that thing tucks in under the body edge. Otherwise you'll never slide it out. Okay, you can see how that happened. This has got a boss on it that the screw runs into. This is all covered in sand. This is all very full of rubbish. This is not a clean and tidy example like the other one at all. So I'm just removing everything from the camera body, and I would say, judging by the corrosion that I see, that it would be a useful thing to strip the leatherettes off the camera back if I can at all do it, because it doesn't look like that's going to be stuck well. There's going to be corrosion everywhere. So all of the components here are just about to go through the ultrasonic cleaner. These pieces will have to be cleaned by hand, of course. Yeah, you can see the sand up in here, I think. There's a few rust spots here. These pieces have got to be cleaned by hand. I'm taking the opportunity to put all of these pieces through. These screws are a bit chewed up on the top cover. Suggests that at least someone has been there tightening the screws, if not doing any more than that. You can see here, the light's not helpful here. You can see a lot of staining here. That's rust. That accounts for those marks that we saw here. that's run down through underneath the underside of that spring. It means water, liquid water, has hit the top of this camera at some stage. Judging by the sand, it's been to the beach. If we're very lucky, it was a freshwater beach, but we'd have to be very lucky. Okay, you can see the base of the camera. There's a lot of corrosion here. There's a lot of adhesive still stuck on the base. I'll have to get that all clean because chances are there's corrosion under that adhesive, and there's certainly lots of sand and filth. Alright, well I don't think I need to show you anything more at the moment. As you can see, I did get the second Retinette F back together again. It's all working nicely now without all the sand. So I'm pleased to have that one behind me, and all its mates and brethren really too. There's the other Retinette F, and then we've got the other Retinette type 022s behind it. So this lot certainly kept me busy for the last few weeks. I hope my videos will help anyone needing to service one of these cameras, and thanks to everybody for watching.